Well, thank you, everybody. My name is Erinch Sahan. I work for an organization called Oxfam. Oxfam works in 94 countries around the world to try to tackle poverty, to try to tackle injustice, and to try to stop hunger. And this has been our mission since we started in 1942. But I'm going to tell you two stories as a part of what I do for Oxfam. And what I do is I try to change the behavior of business. Ever since I was young, I've always seen that companies and businesses have a profound impact on the lives of people living in poverty and the rest of us as well. And we found that increasingly this is the case with people living in poverty, that we need to try to address the way that companies are having an impact on them. So that's my job, and I want to tell you two stories. One, the first story is from Sumatra in Indonesia. It's about a guy called Ahmed. The second story is about a program of change that we've had, a campaign we've been running to try to change the behavior of some of the world's biggest food and beverage companies. It's a campaign called Behind the Brands. So, the first story. Ahmed, I met him about 2.5 years ago in Indonesia, in Sumatra. It's an area that we had just visited because there'd been incredibly large and impactful forest fires. A lot of the local forest, the rainforest, was being burnt down to plant palm oil in most cases. And we'd gone there to try to figure out what was happening, how was this happening, and what impacts was it having on some of the local communities. I spent the day with Ahmed and his family and his community. He, after first few hours of just trying to get to know each other, trying to understand what was happening, Ahmed took me for a walk, and he took me to what you can see in front of you now. It's what the local river has become in the 20 years that after he's lost his land. In the early 1990s, a large palm oil company had come up to Sumatra and had done a deal with some of the local authorities. They'd thrown Ahmed, his village and his community off their land. It was something that they couldn't stop. They didn't have the power to stop. Before this had happened, Ahmed was telling me about what was his life like, what was the life of the community like. This river used to be a large river. It was somewhere where they would fish. They would be able to actually have enough fish to sell to neighboring communities. They would grow vegetables by the river. They would be able to harvest some rubber plantations, and they had enough income from some of these things, and they had enough food to survive and to help some of the neighboring communities survive. Today, this river has been diverted to the palm oil plantations to irrigate. He's been completely thrown off his land. In fact, they've had to move the village over to an area where the only way into the village is through a roadblock. A roadblock that the company controls, because the whole land, for as far as you can see, is the palm oil plantation that controls this land. They can no longer grow vegetables because they don't have the land to. And in fact, a lot of the forest fires in the area have driven the monkeys from the forest into the little bit of forest that's still contained in where their village is. So even if they tried to, the monkeys would eat their vegetables. So this is the situation it's at. They work for the company. They have to work for the company. They have no other choice. And they rock up every morning hoping for work that day. So if there's one word to remember about Ahmed, it's powerlessness. They don't have power over their livelihoods. They don't have power over where their food comes from. And they don't have power over the conditions on which they work. Ahmed's story is not unique. We're seeing a land rush around the world. In Africa, people are being driven from their land because land is becoming more and more valuable to us. As the middle class rises around the world, which is a good thing, we want more products, we want more goods, we want to consume more things, and we need land to grow that on. We need sugar, we need the soy, we need cattle, we need all these things, and land is the thing that's scarce, that we need to be able to access. So Ahmed's story is actually incredibly well played out throughout the world, through Latin America, across Asia and Africa. So this got us thinking, what can we do for people like Ahmed? How can we change the behavior of these companies? And it really comes down to probably 4 forces that pull and push companies to do things differently. there's power. There's the raw power of workers, communities, and farmers. The people that supply the companies, the people who work for the companies, and the communities that are impacted by the activities of companies. Governments can obviously set regulations and rules, and they have their own power to compel companies to do things differently. There are obviously pull factors as well. As consumers become more enlightened about what happens to the very things that are growing the things that they're consuming, they can pull companies into a very different place as well. And obviously investors, people and institutions who own the shares in the company. So we thought a lot about this paradigm, and we felt like companies are impacting the lives of people around the world. And at the moment, regardless of the trends that you might hear about, we still have 800 million people going to bed hungry every night. 800 million hungry people every single night. And businesses and markets aren't, at the moment, doing the right things to help address some of those issues. Governments obviously have a role, and there is no silver bullet. But the way the market system is functioning is failing all those 800 million people. And we want to get to a place where responsible business is the norm. The way companies treat their farmers, the way they treat their workers, the way they treat local communities, all of that has transformed to a way where people are treated differently. So we thought, let's use some of these pull factors. Consumers care, some ethical investors care. What can we achieve if we were to amplify the voice of people like Ahmed? We ended up with about 700,000 people taking action around the world, asking the world's largest food companies to do things differently. And there are 3 crops that really drive the land grabbing and the land rush that I was talking about: soy, palm oil, and sugar. Now, these largest food companies are among the most powerful players in the planet. And if they change the way they bought the ingredients, if they asked that we will only buy our sugar if the land has been acquired in a fair way, if the local community has had free, prior, and informed consent, then things would really change for people like Ahmed. So that was the message we took. That was the message that 300,000 people took to these 2 companies alone, Coca-Cola and Pepsi, and said to them, look, you can't ignore these blind spots. You can't ignore the fact that your palm oil, your sugar is coming from land that's being grabbed, where people have been pushed off their land. And these companies listened. Coke became the first global company, first multinational enterprise in the food industry to commit to free, prior, and informed consent for local communities. They listened to the hundreds of thousands of consumers and supporters who said, we expected more from you, Coca-Cola. Same with Pepsi. Pepsi followed shortly afterwards, and then other companies started coming into the show, to the party. So we started seeing Nestle, we started seeing Unilever, we started seeing other large food and beverage companies start making the same commitment, start asking their suppliers to do things differently. And land is not really the only issue here. We've got so many other things going on. These 10 companies, they're captains of a food industry that is failing 800 million farmers and people around the world. Now, one really interesting fact about the 800 million people going to bed hungry every night, the majority of them are in rural and agricultural communities. It's almost like some sort of unpleasant joke that the people who are growing our food are the hungriest people on earth, the poorest people on earth. And it's not good enough for us to just say, well, let's have a bit of trickle down. Let's just see what happens if we just let markets rip on this. No, we need to demand and ask for more from the companies who control how this food is grown and who's able to benefit from it. These are the 10, and we decided that we're going to go beyond land rights, and we're going to challenge them to do all the other things that need to change for people to be able to leave poverty. So, gender is something that people in development and in the aid space talk about a lot. You empower women in a community, it suddenly starts lifting the whole community out of poverty. And too many places in the world, women are left right in the back seat. They don't have control over what's happening in their community. They're often growing some of these ingredients, but have no control over how the economics of it works, aren't getting the training. And we ask that these 3 large chocolate companies who control 40% of the chocolate market start taking action on cocoa. They listened. On climate change, where the agriculture sector makes up 25% of global emissions. In fact, these are some of the companies that are both driving climate change, but also being the victims of climate change. As things become more expensive and more difficult as climate change hits their own supply chain. So we asked them to move and said, look, no one yet in your industry has made a commitment to have targets to agricultural emissions. Why don't you be the first? And these two companies, Kellogg's and General Mills, listened. Overall, we saw changes on some of the most important issues that are affecting the lives of people in poverty around the world, from gender to land rights to climate change, and we kept going. We started putting some of this into a scorecard, trying to trigger a bit of a race to the top, and we started assessing them on their policies and their practices. How are they doing things differently? As a result of us bringing to their attention, you have some blind spots, guys. This is something that's driving poverty around the world, and you can change it. They started moving. On the left, you'll see where the companies were at the beginning. The scores are small, but the colors are meaningful. The reds, the dark reds, are 1s out of 10. By the time we moved across, within 2 years, we'd seen a whole bunch of companies change their policies because they were listening to consumers, they were listening to the public, and ultimately, they were listening to the stories of Ahmed. But let's just pause for a second and think, why must we push and pull from the outside for companies to do the right thing? We all know they do the right thing if there's a business case. If you can demonstrate that by doing the right thing, that they're in fact going to be making more money. But their purpose is not fit for what we're trying to get them to do. We need them to be driven to do the right thing. We need them to be driven to deliver for communities, for workers, for farmers. And at the moment, the companies that dominate our economic system aren't driven by that, and they do need to be pushed and pulled if it's going to hit their bottom line. And new business models are emerging around the world, particularly in the developing world. In Asia and Africa, we're seeing various forms of cooperative structures. We're seeing various forms of social enterprises that are driven by very different things, by just short-term profit maximization. And what we're seeing on the ground is that enterprises like that are having a very different impact on the lives of people living in poverty. They're the ones that are paying higher prices for cocoa so that people can send their kids to school. They're the ones that are allowing their profits to be shared in a way where people can actually invest into their lives, have some power, have some control. And a new breed of companies is emerging. Companies that are benefit corporations or employee-owned enterprises. Companies that have farmers on the board that control how they pay farmers, what kind of prices they pay farmers. And these are emerging in the developed and developing world. So as I sign off, my question and my challenge to you is this. It's really boring and very 20th century to say we love business or we hate business. Business is as diverse as people in this room and people across the continents. But what we need to do is challenge business, not just to behave better, but to be a different business model altogether, to have a different DNA. And that means that in every sphere of life, whether you're a worker, whether you're a consumer, whether you're a citizen who is affecting the way that policies are made, challenge people who are in decision-making positions to change so that we have a business purpose that's fit to try to lift people out of poverty and to tackle the inequality that's in our world. Thank you very much.